Planning, Zoning, Historic Committee now in session. First item is resolutions. Resolution RS-27-865, sponsored by Purdue, Virtue, and others. Approve an agreement between Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Works for the reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvements at Baker Station Road. Is there a motion? Any discussion?
This was indefinitely deferred in budget.
Again?
It was indefinitely deferred in budget. Just this one, you can approve it, but it's up to you.
I was informed that this was indefinitely deferred at the budget meeting. Would you like to defer? Anybody want to entertain? Okay. Motion to defer. All in favor? Deferral is recommended.
Yeah, you should. Should have both.
If we're going over all the short-term rental amendments, we need packets.
Brandon. That's the only first one was deferred. Everything else.
Right, everything else was approved.
Next, resolution RS-2017-866 approves an agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Works for the reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvements at 14th Avenue North, O'Connell, Virtue, and others. Is there a motion? Any discussion? Seeing no one, all in favor? Councilman Grover.
No, just the first one.
Okay. Okay, so I think I just heard that. So we passed just the first one, and then the rest we moved to defer because I guess I made bad notes.
Other way around. We deferred the first one because the state has tweaked their financing model for those filed after March 5th.
Okay.
That was the one that was filed after March 5th. So that's been indefinitely deferred. But all the remaining railroad safety crosses were passed by Budget and Finance.
Okay, I made a bad note then. Okay, that's because for some reason I was thinking they would defer. All right, thank you, Chair.
No further discussion? All in favor? Motion passes. Next, resolution RS-17-867 approves an agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Works for the reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvement at Post Road, sponsored by Mina Johnson, Virtue, and others. Is there a motion? Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passes. Next, RS-2017-868 approves an agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Works for the reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvement at Sattler Avenue, sponsored by Sledge, Virtue, and others. Is there a motion? Any question, any discussion? All in favor? Next, another TDOT resolution, RS-2017-869, approves agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Works for reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvement at Nesbitt Lane, sponsored by Van Rees, Virtue, and others. Is there a motion? Any discussion? Motion approves. Next, RS-2017-870 approves an agreement between Tennessee Department of Transportation and Department of Public Works for the reimbursement of railroad crossing safety improvements at Old Glen Rose Avenue, sponsored by Freeman, Virtue, and others. Is there a motion? Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Please.
Motion passes. Next, Resolution RS 2017-884 approves an agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Works for traffic signal improvements near the intersection of Church and State Route 6, sponsored by O'Connell, Elrod, and Allen. Is there a motion? Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Next, Resolution RS 2017-885 approves an agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and Department of Public Works for traffic signal improvements at the interchange of Hillsborough Road and I-440, sponsored by Allen and Elrod. And I believe I do have a letter of approval from the sponsor. Is there a motion? Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Next, RS 2017-886 approves an agreement between the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Works for traffic signal improvements at the intersection at Old Hickory Boulevard and State Route 265, sponsored by Glover, Rotten, and others. Is there a motion? Second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Next, RS 2017-887 authorize Ekin Partners LLC to construct and install an aerial encroachment at 147 4th Avenue North for one double-faced projecting illuminating sign, sponsored by O'Connell, Allen, Elrod, and Allen. Is there a motion? Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passes. Next, Resolution RS 2017-901 approves an amendment to the lease agreement between Metro and Eckerd Corporation, sponsored by Kendall, Vircher, and Allen. I do have a letter to approval from the sponsor and the sponsors here. Is there a motion? Motion to approval. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next, bills on second reading. BL 2017-870 declares the property at 34 Knight Road as surplus and authorizes the Director of Public Property to sell property at Keep Nashville, sponsored by Vircher and Allen. I believe there's an amendment. Okay, is there any discussion? All in favor of Amendment 1 proposed by Councilman Glover? Opposed? Amendment passes. There's second amendment proposed by Councilman Mendez. Want to explain the amendment? Sorry. There we go. Sorry about that.
I have to confess to not paying attention to what bill we're on.
The school.
Oh, this amends the purchase and sale agreement just to make sure Metro has a right of first refusal and to get notice if a landlord is going to enforce foreclosure rights on a deed of trust.
Thank you. All in favor of amendment number 2? Opposed? Amendment passes. Now it is bill as amendment number 1 and number 2. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes with amendment. Next, BL 2017-910 approves master telecommunication facility licensing agreement to be used by Metro Department, agencies, boards, and commissions to license their assets and infrastructure to license for location of telecommunication facility on them, sponsored by Bircher, Withers, and Allen. And there is a proposed amendment. Do you want to explain the amendment, Mr. Jameson?
Hello. I'm Teresa Costonis with Metro Legal, and I worked on this. So the amendment does a handful of things. It most significantly decreases the amount of rent for certain kinds of facilities in the public right-of-way from an amount of $2,040 a year to $1,800 a year. It also, instead of having a flat escalator, annual escalator of 3% applied to that site license fee, this fee would be adjusted by the lesser of 3% or the CPI. Instead, the master license agreement has a number of exhibits to it that are called site license agreements that are for individual site locations. And there is an additional site license agreement that is added to the master license agreement that's specific to fiber runs or cable runs that attach to multiple different poles so that they could do one agreement for multiple different poles. And in that case, the rate would be $32 per pole that is attached to, or other pieces of infrastructure, but it'll probably mostly be poles. Additionally, instead of the site license agreements co-terminating with the master license agreement, a provision was added allowing the site license agreements to continue even with a terminated master license agreement, and the master license agreement terms would continue to apply. And I think those are probably the most major changes that we made to the amendment.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on amendment? If I may, I do have one question on the amendment. On the amendment package, if I remember correctly, page 40, amendment 1 and 2 and 3, and 1 is right-of-way, and then second one is on the building. And it seems like amount is, one is nearly $2,000 per year, or second one is per month. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I believe that's based on market rates.
Okay, thank you. So no further discussion. All in favor of the amendment? Oh, sorry. Sorry about that.
Okay, I was trying to follow on the rate adjustment. So walk me back through that one more time, please, and let me try to make sure I understand the CPI. Did you say 3% are greater or less?
The lesser.
So it's going to max out at 3%. So if CPI goes up 4.5, we're going to cap at 3.
There is a provision that's correct, but there is also a provision that the rates can be amended by council approval by ordinance. So if that turned out to be really inadequate in terms of the amount of actual inflation in the economy, that would be the remedy to adjust those rates.
Okay, and how did we come to the conclusion? I think you from 2,400 to 1,800, or right? And how did we reach that conclusion?
So when we originally proposed the 2040 rate, that was based on some recommendations made by a consulting firm that Metro hired, Connected Nation Exchange, who has advised us on some of these telecom issues previously. And the reaction of the telecom companies to that rate was they thought it was really exorbitant. So we looked at it. We looked in particular at the NES rate, which is $1,789 per year, and we came down to closer to that rate because we figured that was probably a pretty reasonable estimate of costs in this market, and we rounded it to 1,800 because that was a little easier for the accounting purposes.
Okay, and then let me get you to, I'm sorry to have you redo this, but I just want to make sure I understand the number. The $32 per pole connection fee, explain that to where I can, because obviously technology is changing drastically. I'm trying to follow along with this in order to understand how we're structuring the pricing, and the CPI part scares me a little bit, but you know, if we can go back and renegotiate.
With the new exhibit E, I think it is, that's been added, the new site license agreement for the fiber or cable runs. This was also something that the telecom companies kind of asked us for when we sat down and met with them and went over the agreement. There are multiple different kinds of telecom attachments that might go on Metro assets under this agreement. And small cells is probably, that new type of attachment is probably the reason why we're doing this to begin with. But there might be like fiber runs to go to service those small cells or just in general for other purposes. And what they wanted to be able to do when their attachment consisted solely of like a fiber run or a cable run or something like that, a wireline attachment, they wanted to be able to do one site license agreement for a length, a span of wire or cable or fiber that would attach to multiple poles and then have one rate for that. So the rate would be based on the number of poles, or we call them infrastructures in the agreement, that it touches, basically, along that span. So it's 32 per, so it'd be a
new agreement per each pole.
Okay.
Make it easier.
In order to try and manage it, okay. And then one final question, and Mr. Cooper, maybe this is you answer this one, or either one of them doesn't make any difference. When we gave the contract, and I don't remember where we honored it, where I'm going to call it the small sales, is kind of the way I was for downtown properties. Is this in addition to, or is this I guess in unison with that contract that we awarded on that, what, 6 months ago or so?
So a few months ago, the council passed a zoning ordinance that essentially gave Metro control over where new poles go in the right-of-way. And so if you're talking about franchise agreements, this doesn't have, I mean, if they need a franchise agreement, they would still have to have a franchise agreement. This is separate from that. This is just for the attachments to Metro infrastructure.
Okay, so this is for Company A to come in, attach something on one of a Metro-owned property, and then we are receiving an annual
Correct.
Rent. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Now, they may also need a franchise agreement if they fall.
But this
under
is
that.
not in unison. This is something.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair.
Is there any other discussion on the amendment? All in favor on the amendment?
Aye.
Opposed? Amendment passes. Now bill as amended, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next one is Bill 2017-911, abandons existing easement rights in the former right-of-way for proposed property located at 1930 Castleman Drive, and to acquire 2 new sanitary sewer main easement for properties located at 1930 and 2000 Castleman Drive, sponsored by Pooley, Elrod, and Allen. I have a letter from the sponsor to approve. Is there a motion?
Move.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Next one is bills on third reading. First one is BL 2017-608. Amends Metro codes to establish distinct land uses for short-term rental property owner-occupied and short-term rental property not owner-occupied, and establish a phase-out date in year 2021 for short-term rental property not owner-occupied, sponsored by Hager, Rotten, and others. So there is a is there a motion? Okay, there's a amendment. Let's see first. Councilmember Glover.
Go ahead.
Okay. Councilmember Hart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question. I have a constituent who doesn't live in the house that is a short-term rental property, but it's on the home house property. Would that be considered not owner occupied? Or is that, it's on the same property and same location, but it's just two different dwellings?
Maybe ask planning that question.
The codes department would be best positioned to answer this, but I believe if it's a detached accessory dwelling unit, that it would be owner occupied. If it's a duplex where they have two separate units, then I think there's a potential that it would be non-owner occupied.
Say that again?
There are different uses in the code for having multiple properties on one, multiple units on one property.
Right.
So like for multifamily has a series of multifamily units. For having two on one lot, there are two main types of uses. One is called a detached accessory dwelling unit, and it's a smaller unit
Right.
that is subordinate to the main house that's on the property.
And it is.
Okay, it's kind of like the mother-in-law suite kind
Right,
of thing that you
kinda,
see?
sorta, yes.
Okay, if it was permitted as a dadu, then there is potential that it's owner-occupied.
Okay.
If it's a duplex where they can transfer both units to different ownership, then it may not be owner-occupied, it may be non-owner occupied.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Hager would like to introduce the amendment. Just a second. Wait.
We have been till 1:30 in the morning at the Planning Commission, and it passed unanimously at the Planning Commission. There are some amendments that I wanted to introduce, which is Amendment A, which the caption is 2020 and 2021. So in order to get the caption in line with that, I'm amending this that the last time that they can get a permit for a non-owner occupied in the R and RS districts is June 28, 2020, which would put it out there to the year of 2021. So it's a 3-year phase-out program. The other amendment is number B. That particular amendment is just a cleanup as to the language in 608, since the $50 renewal fee is already in the ordinance, so it takes that out of it's 608. The Amendment C, Mr. Jameson indicated that since this is some type of zoning bill, that we have to publish it in the paper of general circulation to give people notice of 608. Amendment D is another cleanup ordinance within 608 to clean it up as well. In Amendment E, there was a double there of that, and it takes out one of those. Those are the amendments. Oh, yeah, and then Amendment F is another cleanup where it was noted as 6. At 6, it was 5. It's just substituting those two around. Those are the amendments that I have to offer at this particular time.
Thank you, Councilmember Hager. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Chair. I know we've been getting a lot of emails on this, and I know we had something come out from one of our state senators. I hope that we would defer, because I know the committee is not finished yet. If we're not going to defer, then I'm going to end up voting no for it right now, not because I disagree with it. I just think that we put together a committee, and the vice mayor put together a committee to look at this holistically. And so therefore, if I'm forced to take a stand right now, if we're not going to defer, it's not that I don't want to try to support it. It's just I don't think we're ready to get there. And in talking with the chair of the ad hoc committee on this, I think they feel like they're pretty close to a compromise for most parties. So with that in mind, I would ask that this be deferred and that the bills can be brought together where we can study everything in unison. Thank you.
There's an amendment on the amendment is on the floor.
So right now, amendment is on the floor. So we are discussing amendment and not the bill as a whole. So let's go back to the discussion on the amendment. So Councilmember O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move to withdraw amendment number I, which is one I introduced. I think in service to the simplicity of the bill, its general discussion and pathway that led us to this point, and the fact that I think we have heard loud and clear from Nashvillians on this one, the appropriate course of action, I'd like to move to withdraw amendment number I, please. Thank you.
Thank you. If you would, could you explain the amendment I for the viewing audience?
Sorry, I turned myself off there. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sure. Amendment I basically would have included the RM, basically the residential multifamily zoning designation, since I know the spirit of 608 is to target residential areas. So this would have included those in the general provisions of it. And I think in order to avoid complicating the discussion, we'll just keep it as simple as it is.
Thank you. Councilman Weathers.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I am in favor of the amendments that the sponsor has brought forward. I know we have a large number of amendments. Just wanted to speak quickly to the matter of the ad hoc committee, which has been meeting for quite a long time. I don't sit on that committee, but as a council member that has north of 500 short-term rentals in my district, this is a topic of frequent discourse on multiple sides with my constituents, and so I've made it my business to be present at virtually every one of those. And just wanted to state, I guess, for the group that I'm at this point in favor of going ahead and moving forward with 608. The committee is not yet at a point of having any specific recommendations that they're going to bring. I believe it's sort of a caption bill, and having attended even the most recent meetings in the last couple of weeks, there are not any specific proposals that are going to be brought forth at this time. I know there is the desire to have the one end-all and be-all short-term rental bill, and I think that's going to elude us, and we're going to continue discussing this topic and revisiting it for the foreseeable future, frankly. So I just wanted to say I'm in favor of the amendments that the sponsors introduced and encourage my council members to vote for the bill as amended, and then we can, maybe the committee can bring forth some specific recommendations in the near future, and we can take those up separately. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Hager.
Just real quick, these amendments that I just gave to the floor, these are all housekeeping bills. There are two other amendments that I would agree to, and one of them is Amendment G by Council Lady Berkeley Allen that reduces the cap from 12 to 10 people. And Councilman Mendez has Amendment H, which basically says that all these short-term rentals have to be owned by a person and not an LLC. And I'm in favor of that amendment too, and I'd ask those be passed along with 608.
Thank you. Councilman O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if this is a question for you or Mr. Jamison. If it's possible to move all amendments that are favored by the lead sponsor at this point and move to have all others. I don't know if we have to vote on these individually, but if so, I guess we can go through them in what amounts to regular order here. But if there's a way to efficiently adopt the amendments supported by the lead sponsor here, I would love to do that.
Thank you.
For clarity's sake, it might help for me to review just briefly the amendments that have been moved, and then with everyone's understanding, you could take one collective vote. If anyone wants to pull a discussion of any one of those, we certainly will entertain that before the collective vote. The amendments that have been moved, briefly, Amendment A fixes the year in the final Section 8 from 2019 to 2020, so it's consistent with the caption and refers to properly issued and maintained permits having that option. Amendment B, which has been moved, eliminates the reference to a $50 fee and simply leaves a fee. The reason for that is that there's no fee study that's been conducted yet, so there will be a fee to be determined, amount to be determined later. C would add publication in a newspaper, which is required under your code section 1740-080. D clarifies that the revocation of the permit can't be reapplied for from 1 year, but we didn't state from 1 year from when. This clarifies from the date of revocation. E deletes the grammatical that duplication. F is simply a numerical fix. We went from Roman numeral 4 to Roman numeral 6. G that has been moved by the sponsor, I do want to clarify that there is a supplemental version of G on your desks. What this would do is first allow not owner-occupieds in agriculture, AG, AR2, R, and RS, and then would it limit occupants in R, RS, RSA to 2 times the sleeping number of rooms plus 4, or 10, whichever is the lesser of those two. H, which has been moved, would define owner-occupied as limited to natural persons. I has been withdrawn. That is my understanding of the amendments that have been, at this point, moved.
Councilmember Hager.
Mr. James, can you clarify the amendment G again?
Sure. So, and just to clarify the clarification, in your original amendments package, it simply stated that the maximum occupancy for not owner-occupied in R, RS, RSA, RA zone districts was either 10 or 2 times the sleeping room plus 4, whichever was the lower. The revised version of that fixes what was an error on my part and makes clear that this would essentially be allowing not owner-occupieds in those districts, AG, AR2A, RS80, RS 3.75.
Then at this point in time, I want to withdraw Amendment G, and we can put that on, we can discuss it later when Mr. Chilman's bill comes down the road. Thank you.
So just to clarify, Councilmember Hager, you are moving Amendment A, B, C, D, E, F, and H.
That's correct.
Thank
you, Madam Chair.
Council Lady Gilmore.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I'm not on this committee. I just had a couple of questions. One was, who is going to enforce with all practicality? Some of these things are very specific. Some things are very general, like checking mail, you can do that, check the ownership. But when you're actually talking about going inside the rooms and the specific, that's the first question. And then the second piece is, I do like the part about the LLC. And so my question, like no LLC owned Airbnbs, or STRPs, let me stay away from Airbnb. So my question is, why are we going from, if we're concerned about, I'm not clear about what the concern is. I'm not clear if we're concerned about LLCs owning STRPs, or are we concerned about people in general owning our STRPs? So that would be a question as well, because some of these same persons that own STRPs are constituents, and it gives them an opportunity to make money. I understand there are some people that are being irresponsible, but not all. So those are my questions.
In order of the questions, ultimately it is the Department of Codes and the zoning administrator that is tasked with the enforcement of the short-term rental property regulations. With respect to the LLC amendment, the sponsor has stepped out for just a second, but I'll do my best to explain what I believe his motivation is. There have been several instances where a so-called owner-occupied STRP that was owned by an LLC turned out that the actual occupant was perhaps, in one instance I'm aware of, a 5% owner of the LLC. And that did not jibe, at least with the sponsor's sense of what was intended by owner occupancy for purposes of STRPs.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm saying I'm okay with that. I get that. So that being understood, I'm concerned that while we're giving them a 3-year period, persons that own STRPs, but why are we eliminating all of them? And especially when we talk about earlier, and we kind of had an offline conversation, the fact that you could have a duplex and have an STRP and it be considered to be non-owner occupied, and then you could have a dadu and then it considered to be owner occupied, and it's, even though it's on the same parcel of land, they're more disconnected or not as close as the duplexes are. I mean, I just see a couple of gaps.
I think we're into the realm now where you may want to, in terms of why something is being proposed, I would refer you to the sponsor. I believe the sponsor would probably suggest that 608 is not eliminating owner-occupied STRPs. It is eliminating, within a period of time, not owner-occupied STRPs in R and RS districts primarily. That's the most significant effect of this. As to the policy reasons and validity and legitimacy of that, I would defer to the sponsor.
Any further question, Council Lady?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, if you could just maybe articulate that a little bit more, I would appreciate it. So now, what are the rules? I asked the chair, right? And then the chair asked okay, I just want to make sure. All right, thank you.
With the interest from Council Lady Gilmore about the LLC and ownership, maybe would like to ask the sponsor of the amendment, Councilmember Mendes, for the reasoning for eliminating LLC.
Thanks. So for owner-occupieds, I'm aware of at least one real estate development company who's got an office downtown that is skirting the owner-occupied rules by setting up multiple limited liability companies where the development company owns about 95% of the company and an employee owns 5%, and then the 5% owner and employee walks in and gets an owner-occupied permit. And so this one real estate development company has 4 or 5 large full house rentals that are all have owner-occupied permits, and I've been told by Metro Legal and Codes that our current law doesn't specifically prohibit that. So this changes it. So an owner-occupied permit requires an actual human being to be the owner-occupant rather than a limited liability company. And then I guess I employed my law degree to use a lot of words to try to eliminate every sort of non-human owner that I could think of, and that's what this does.
Thank you. Councilmember Withers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to address really quickly Councilmember Gilmore's question about enforcement. That definitely has been quite a topic of discussion in the council generally and also on the committee. But just want to get back to, you know, this body passes zoning legislation basically, and any kind of our codes are always subject to enforcement. Perhaps the ad hoc committee bill will come up with some different solutions for enforcement. And I would even say that if it ends up being the case that the ad hoc committee comes up with some new and improved enforcement conditions that make people a little bit more comfortable having non-owner occupieds in their neighborhoods at some point in the near future, maybe if we test that out a little bit, you know, we could make a different decision. But basically what this bill does today is to say at this point in time, at least from my standpoint, while it may be the case that only some of the non-owner occupieds are causing a lot of problems, the reality is that we have no enforcement. There is no enforcement ability that we have other than to say that our constituents need to have a daylight period of when this is going to end potentially until we can figure something out. Because right now, Metro government is issuing permits that we cannot protect neighbors against. And I'm talking about lewd behavior or a lot of noise or a lot of those things. That's what we've talked about in committee, is that many of those quality of life complaints that disrupt an entire neighborhood require an actual police officer to be present, and in the evening hours and on weekends, codes isn't there and police officers aren't there. So we're just not at the point where we can actually defend the neighborhood against, you know, some of the violations that we're having in those cases. And, you know, maybe if we get to that point where we are there, we could have a different conversation. And this, again, gives us a couple of years to try to work that out, in fact. And so, again, we pass zoning and codes laws all the time, and it's always a matter of enforcement, but our legislation itself usually doesn't contemplate enforcement other than reliance upon codes, I believe.
Thank you. Councilmember Scott Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am not on this committee, but I have a lot of Airbnbs inside my neighborhood. Some act well and some act not so well, which I think we all have those. I'm in support of the sponsor of this bill. I think there's some more work to be done. I would ask for a deferral on this basis. You know, we know there's good and bad type 2s. And
Councilmember Scott Davis, we are still discussing on the amendment, so we can discuss deferral after the amendment is passes.
all right, no problem. I'll reserve my.
Thank you. Councilmember Hager.
I just want to clarify real quick that, you know, this bill only affects non-owner occupied in the residential and residential single areas. That's all it affects. And I want to make that clear and everybody to understand that. I also want to let this body know that I've been to 13 ad hoc meetings that we've had every Wednesday at 5 o'clock, and they go to about 7 o'clock. And we've discussed a lot of amendments, and it is my position that the amendments I have on here are really housekeeping amendments, and there will be more amendments with Councilman Shulman's bill when it comes up. But I'm asking this body to go ahead and pass 608, and then we'll have discussions about these other amendments that will tweak 608 if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Scott Davis, are you on the amendment? Okay. Councilmember Withers.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. One thing I just wanted to reiterate, since this is an important matter, if Mr. Jameson could verify, do any of these amendments that are proposed, do any of these that the sponsor has asked us to add to the bill for consideration, do any of those amendments require a re-referral to the Planning Commission?
With the withdrawal of Amendment G, then no. Amendments A through F and H, which have been moved, would not require re-referral to the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Council Lady Catherine Murphy.
I'd like to call for the question on the amendments.
Call for the question. So amendment on the floor is A, B, C, D, E, F, H, and G and I were withdrawn. For the interest of the party, I would like to take each amendment separately. Amendment A.
You can say, if there's no objection, you can take them all together.
If there's no objection, we can take all of the amendment together. Is there objection? Objections none. So amendment A, B, C, D, E, F, and H. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Is there a motion to move bill as amended? Second. So now, all in discussion, bill as amended.
So I think there may be more amendments. Councilman Rosenberg.
Okay. Councilmember Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand. There are good and there are bad Airbnbs. You know, unfortunately, I've experienced both in my neighborhood. I have a lot of them, like a lot of other council members here. When you look at a lot of the good Airbnbs, you know, it seems like, you know, I don't think we should be outlawing and doing a moratorium, if I said that correctly, of 3 years, 2 years, or 5 years. People have made significant investments, and people are running good type 2s. Now, if we're going to ban them, you know, from now on, starting tomorrow or whenever the commission or the council says we need to ban type 2s in R and RS districts from this day out, no more, that's fine. But in my district, I have an abundance of other businesses which I don't like. And right now, we cannot put any more tire shops and other businesses, you know, in certain areas in my neighborhood anymore when they used to be all over the place. However, though, I'm not going to put a moratorium on a business that I don't agree with. And I think that's the issue that we're looking at right now. And I think there's a way for us to figure out some middle ground. And I'd like the committee to finish their work. And, you know, Councilman Hager has worked very hard on this bill. And once again, like I've said, I'm in agreement of banning them from R and RSs. But, you know, as far as grandfather.
Thank you, Councilmember Scott Davis. I do apologize. There is actually 3 other amendments Councilmember Rosenberg would like to introduce. Okay. I was just informed. So we will need to go back to the amendment. Councilmember Rosenberg, would you like to introduce your amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a few amendments that would all basically do the same thing. Much of the conversation, a lot of the concern around short-term rentals, which I'm sympathetic to, surround the effect on dense single-family neighborhoods. Out in the rural parts of my district, we have basically vacation rentals up in the hills on large lots where nobody's nearby. It's tree hidden. So this Amendment J, which I think is the first one, Amendment J would basically just says that this that 608 would not apply to lots over 1 acre. That's certainly my preference, but if the committee opposes that, or if it's opposed on the floor tomorrow, I've got 2 others. The second one would instead make exception for lots over 1 acre in the GSD, and then the third one would make an exception for lots over 2 acres in the GSD. So if anybody on the committee is inclined to move this, I'd be appreciative.
Is there a motion to move Amendment J from the committee? I'm sorry. No, motion fails. So now I'm going back to bill as amended. Council Lady Kathleen Murphy.
Madam Chair?
It was just J, so we get to vote on K and L. Right? That was just a vote on J. So is there a motion on K and L?
Sorry about that. It's just, I'm trying to get you, Councilmember Rosenberg. Here we go. Okay, here, I got you. You got 2 more amendments. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so the first one, J, which I guess did not get a motion, was to make exception for lots over 1 acre. The second one is over 1 acre only within the GSD. So basically, the 1 acre lots within the USD would remain under 608.
So is there a committee member would like to entertain to move a motion to move move amendment? Motion. Any discussion on the amendment? Okay, let me clear everybody. I'm assuming there was bill as amended, so I'm going to clear everybody in the queue. So if you want to talk about the amendment, it was just introduced. Okay, so Councilmember Withers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is going to be a recurring question to Mr. Jameson and perhaps to planning. Would this amendment, if added to the bill, re-refer this ordinance to the Planning Commission?
Yeah, well, you have an option. It would either be referred to the Planning Commission, re-referred, or you'd need 27 votes because it would be considered disapproved.
Based on that analysis alone, I mean, I would not be, with all due respect to my colleague, I would not be inclined to support anything that re-refers all this back to the Planning Commission where we will have another 5-hour hearing. I would recommend instead that we work with the sponsor to look at this for upcoming legislation, if that's okay. But I would, for that reason, I would not be inclined to support this at this time.
Council Lady Catherine Murphy.
I'm sorry, I wanted to be next in line for amendments.
Okay.
So I can just, I guess, clear me out until we're done with
Okay.
District 35.
Sure. Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would draw everyone's attention to the communication we received today from Councilman Schulman on behalf of the ad hoc committee. I mean, as he highlighted, 608 has already kind of, for anybody who's been working on this, including those of us who were sponsors and watched the work of the committee, 608 is designed to be simple and achieve a goal of, it's got a very simple goal of identifying that we have a portion of our zoning code that is residential, and that is exactly what it is designed to do, is reinforce that zoning code. Councilman Schulman has identified that we do have a placeholder bill that will be suitable for all kinds of considerations in policy that are both in the ad hoc committee, but also I think in the body as a whole. And I think that is a more suitable vehicle for looking at sophisticated and detailed and kind of context issues that are maybe not captured by 608, and I would encourage the sponsor of these amendments to consider that approach instead, because to Councilman Withers' point, I think a re-referral process at this point does not strengthen 608, which has already gotten a lot of strong endorsements. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bettner.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I want to oppose this from a different place. In my district, we have also many big farms and properties of significant acreage. And I share that with the newly elected council lately, Cambridge, as part of the city. People over there have complained to me that there are already some short-term rentals that are relocated in those areas, and they asked me to, how can we stop them? And I try to explain all this ordeal we've been going through for over a year, trying to empower our residents to have some control of what happened next door. So I think that it's very clear to me that the people in my district will oppose opening the door for bigger acreage properties to be approved, so I won't support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can't support this because going back to the Planning Commission would just delay the vote on this. I would recommend to fellow council members that if they want to put an amendment on here, they can get with Councilman Schulman and put those amendments on there in that separate bill, and then that can go to the Planning Commission where the public can have a say-so as well on any of these amendments that they're suggesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on Amendment K? Council Lady Gill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just keep it really brief. I just wanted to put some clarity there. I supported the LLC being in there. I think that was misinterpreted. I just wanted to offer that for clarity, that I supported that part. I think that's very important. I don't mind individuals owning. I don't think the LLC should own non-owner occupied. I just wanted to clarify that. And then just quickly, I wanted to add two more things. I think too, a lot of families come, I'm thinking about the families that use STRPs. They offer an affordable option, and some of these hotels are very, very expensive in Nashville. And I know as a city, there's only so many, well, let me just ask, let me not assume. Attorney Jameson, what is the maximum that we can charge for a fee when someone's operating the STRP? Is the max 50 or can it go higher?
You mean as a penalty?
No, not as a penalty, just don't we charge them for a permit? How much is the permit?
I think it's a $50 permit.
So are we allowed to charge a higher fee by the state, or is it 50? How did we come up with 50?
It has to be tied to the actual costs involved in the department of administering the program, and that's all I know.
Okay, and so codes?
Council Lady? Right now, we are discussing on the Amendment K, especially reintroduced by Councilmember Rosenberg.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Then, all right.
Councilman Withers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just again, to reiterate a point that's been made, 608 has had quite a bit of discussion, has a unanimous recommendation of approval from the Planning Commission as being consistent with the general plan. I would welcome an opportunity to work with Councilmember Rosenberg or Councilmember Gilboa or Councilmember Hurt on some of these, agricultural districts maybe, or looking at treating duplexes differently. As I mentioned in one of my earlier comments, and I've spoken on this a few times, but this bill is meant to bring simplicity and clarity, at least for now, definitely until such time as we do get enforcement better, and that's not something we're never going to be able to write a piece of legislation that says how we enforce until we have those resources in place, and we just don't. So again, with all due respect to my colleagues, I would ask that give an up or down vote on 608. I'm at this point in favor of it, at least at this time, until we come up with some better solutions. And we can certainly keep working on those amendment proposals later. But at this point in time, again, I unfortunately cannot support the amendment by my colleague from District 35, at least at this moment in time. Welcome to have that conversation in the future in a separate bill.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on Amendment K? Is there a motion?
That moved.
So all in favor of Amendment K? All opposed?
Can we do it again, a show of hands on that?
Please show of hand. All in favor of Amendment K, please raise your hand. None. All in oppose Amendment K, raise your hand.
Okay.
13. Motion fails. Is there any other amendment you would like to introduce at this point?
Councilman Rosenberg.
Councilmember Rosenberg.
While I would encourage a brief discussion on the matter, at most, I would like to make the motion or ask for it.
So, is there any discussion on Amendment L? Councilmember Hager.
I'm not in favor of that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sledge.
Previous question.
So, amendment, I think it's L. All in favor on Amendment L? Please raise your hand. All opposed? Amendment fails. So now, amendment we have is Amendment A, B, C, D, E, F, and H. And motion in here is move the bill as amended. Is there a discussion? Councilmember Hager.
I guess I'm just calling for the question and go ahead and vote on the bill as 608 as amended.
Call for the question. All in favor of the call for the question? Opposed?
All right, now for the vote.
Council Lady Murphy, are you?
Oh, no,
You can-
the bill
see-
passed, so I'm good. I mean,
The previous question passed. Now it's
So previous question passes. Now we are in motion bill as amended. All in favor? Opposed? I need a raise your hand. All in favor?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay.
Opposed?
2. All right.
Motion passes. Well, thank you for hanging in there for 608. So now we can move to the next agenda. Next one is BL 2017-858. Changes 4.78 acres from R6 to SP zoning for various properties located along 33rd Avenue North, 35th Avenue North, Trevor Street, and Delaware Avenue to permit a maximum of 123 multi-family units. Sponsored by Councilmember Kendall. I've got letter of approval.
There's an amendment.
Councilmember Kendall.
Yes, I believe there's an amendment. Is that correct?
Yes.
I would move the amendment first. And the amendment, brief explanation. The amendment is to do a separate traffic study prior to the plot being approved, final approval.
Thank you. Is there discussion on the amendment? Council Lady Murphy.
I have a question for planning. In this amendment, it says that with the final site plan submittal, an updated traffic impact study shall be submitted. If that traffic study shows that they should do more traffic upgrades, infrastructure upgrades, or anything like that, would this amendment make them mandatory in the plan that is attached that we're passing on third and final consideration tonight?
So the plan that is attached does not take into account the updated traffic impact study to be conducted when a final site plan is submitted to planning. I believe that what would happen is when the final site plan was submitted and the updated TIS was submitted, planning staff and Metro Public Works staff would work together to see which conditions could be applicable with the final site plan.
So what I'm hearing you say is that when this study comes in, and if it were to show that there were maybe as little as an added stop sign or 2 feet more of sidewalk needed, or as much as another traffic signal on Charlotte, that it might not be mandated at all or would not be enforced with this site plan?
That's possible.
I'll speak, I guess, on the amendment, because if it goes on the bill, I have serious concerns. Many as you know, this site is surrounded by the interstate where a dump truck fell off because it's extremely steep through here, and it's surrounded by my district and the Charlotte corridor. I have a lot of concerns that if, even with the traffic impact study coming in later, that the suggestions that that traffic impact study has would not be enforceable. And so without that guarantee, I can't support the amendment or the bill. And so it's just very concerning that we would not have those guarantees for the constituents who need the infrastructure upgrades.
Thank you. Councilmember Glover.
Actually, I want to redirect to the planning department very quickly, if I could. And so while it may not be mandated, the likelihood that they're not going to have them do it before they'll issue the permits, what's that percentage?
Generally speaking, when the Public Works Department reviews a TIS, the improvements that are needed to be made by the developer reflect what's in the TIS.
And so let me translate that if I may. In other words, they would pretty much still have to do it.
Generally speaking.
Thank you.
Councilmember Withers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With all due respect to the sponsor of this one, I really appreciate the effort to look at the traffic again, because there was a lot of community feedback about that at the public hearing. Myself, I definitely respect the experience of some of my more experienced council members. As a relatively new council member, I know that I have inherited some SPs in some cases where there were things that the community thought was in the plan, and when we have gone to look at whether or not those elements of the plan are being constructed or not and found out that they were not included, it's because it wasn't in writing in the SP. And that's what makes me uncomfortable with voting for this on third reading, even with this amendment. I definitely respect that effort, but I personally would feel more comfortable if the traffic study were done and some additional community conversation happened after that traffic impact study were done, so that then we could hear from the community about how comfortable or not they are with that revised plan. So again, I really respect the sponsor for working on that. I'm just not comfortable with this process.
So we are speaking on the amendment. Councilmember Bettner.
I would like to listen to the sponsor, and then I'll come back later if I need to have any questions. Is that okay?
We have quite a few people in the queue. I believe they are on amendment, so let me hear from all the people with the question, and then I will come back to the sponsor of the bill. Councilmember Vercher.
Thank you, Chair. Can someone from planning speak to what is permissible by right for this zoning?
It's zoned R6, which allows 6,000 square foot lots. They'd be allowed approximately 34 lots, with a portion of them duplexes, for a total of 42 units, though they would need to go through the subdivision process in order to be able to do that.
So permissible by right is 42 units, and this SP is increasing to 123 units?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Scott Davis.
Thank you. This question is for the planning staff members. This is for planning staff and Councilman Kendall, whoever can answer this. This is located in Councilman Kendall's district, correct?
Yes.
Okay. My next question is, was this approved by Planning Commission?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the amendment, will the amendment change that approval process?
No.
And so, since it was approved by Planning Commission, and the amendment would not change it to a disapproval process, and if Councilman Kendall will answer this, I think he's only trying to make the bill better. And so, I just like to remind people, I mean, we can all agree or disagree, but he's got committee support, and he's got staff commission support, and his amendment does not change that. And even though I know we all have a lot of things to do, I urge you to support the sponsor in his decision, because after all, this is his neighborhood, and he has commission and staff support on his side here, and all he's trying to do, which I'm assuming with this bill, this amendment is trying to add extra traffic conditions in case Planning and Public Works deem so when they submit the final SP. Am I wrong? Am I right, Councilman Kendall?
I will come back to Councilman Kendall.
Okay.
There's a more question in the queue. Councilmember Hastings, are you on the amendment?
Yes, I would like to move the call for the question.
Call for the question. All in favor for the call for the question? All opposed? So discussion continues. Councilmember Steve Glover, are you on the amendment?
Yes, yes. And I'm going to ask this question to Mr. Jameson and also back to planning. Now, I haven't read the amendment thoroughly. Mr. Jameson, I'm sure you assisted, if not writing the whole thing. If this is placed into the SP, does it not have the same effect as anything that's placed inside of an SP? It has to be done. There's no way to skirt around it. If this amendment is now attached to the SP, am I completely confused on how this works with SPs?
That is correct, that the SP would require that a traffic impact study be submitted.
Okay. And so I guess, and I'll ask this, since we're going to give it back to the sponsor to talk, is it in such a way that if Public Works requires it, rather than us assuming, then the work would have to be done if on a new traffic study? Because obviously nothing's going to be issued, no permit, nothing's going to be issued until the new traffic study is done.
That is historically and typically how Public Works operates. That is not explicit in the amendment.
Okay. So I'll leave that open for the sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Haywood, are you on the amendment?
I'm probably a little bit confused. I'm wondering what the first traffic impact study revealed, that there has to be another traffic impact study. What did the first traffic impact study reveal? And this is for planning.
The question is, what was the first traffic impact study revealed on that project?
It was, I believe it was first scoped in 2015, but then updated through the process, though some of the background information as to what had been developed in the area, I believe, had not been updated. But they did do an update throughout the review process.
Thank you.
Councilmember Withers, are you on the amendment?
Yes.
Go ahead.
At the risk of repeating myself a little bit, I guess, I'm really responding to the amount of community concern that was expressed at the public hearing. And so while I appreciate the effort to get a traffic impact study, I would be interested to hear from constituents, perhaps whether they are more comfortable with the plan after the traffic study or not. So I guess I'm wanting to respond to the community concern and say that this will give us additional information, but that doesn't tell us whether the neighbors in that vicinity are actually comfortable with the plan, even with the traffic impact study being done. So again, I appreciate the effort to add this in to the plan, but I'm still just concerned about that public process. And so the amendment itself does not satisfy my concern about the public process.
Thank you. Council Lady Vercher.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm trying to figure this out because I believe when the constituents came as it related to this matter, I believe Council Lady Allen handled that. If we could, just for my level of comfort, if the sponsor can speak to the efforts as it relates to the community engagement for this. And then my other part too, just increasing this densities for this area. I'm familiar with it. I work within close proximity from this area, so I know how steep that incline is up there on Trevor Street. And I don't really want to, it's Councilman Kendall's district, but at the end of the day, what we have to make sure that we recognize is that we are the zoning authority. And although councilmanic courtesy is oftentimes practiced. We are the zoning authority. I inherited a district where some things were not done in the best interest of my neighborhood because we didn't have, or some opted to not exercise that zoning authority right. I don't know. I hear about the traffic impact study, that it was completed in 2015. I don't know what that data revealed, if the traffic impact study supported this increase in density or not. What I can attest to is that those streets are really narrow. And as our city continues to grow, we have to make sure that we're always conscious about not blocking people in. If I'm correct, I believe is 2 ways out of this subdivision, so to speak, or at least 2 ways what I saw. And then one street actually dead ends into the back of another condo complex on the street. So just want to remind my colleagues, you are the zoning authority, and sometimes it may not be popular, but sometimes we have to do the right thing. And the constituents came out and was asking and pleading for us. I think it warrants more conversations to be had. I don't know if there's a time frame as it relates for this project, if it's time sensitive or not. And I don't know if the sponsor will be open for just more community dialogue so that his colleagues feel more comfortable in supporting whatever the outcome may be for this particular project. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Kendall, I promise you I will give you last word, one more. Council Lady Allen, former chair, Lady Allen.
Thank you very much. Just one question of clarification on the, my memory of what was being requested by the constituents was a traffic impact study that would be updated to include all the new development that's happened in the area. Is that specified somewhere, or is the way it's worded going to make sure that happens?
The amendment would require a new traffic impact study with submittal of the final site plan, which would require revised or new scoping by the traffic engineer.
Okay, so the projects that have since finished would be included?
Correct. Public Works staff and the traffic engineer chosen by the developer would work on what that scope would include. But yes, it would include any new development within the boundaries of the scoping.
Okay, and the last one was done in 2015, is that what we said?
The last one began in 2015 and was revised in July of 2016 and May of 2017, though we're not 100% clear on whether that included an updated scoping or not.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted, because I know that was important to them to make sure all the new traffic that's been brought about is included in that, because that's something that we've struggled with in planning, is when we have 6 different apartments all sort of happening at the same time, each one acts like they're in a bubble, which they're not. So, okay, that's important. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience, Councilman Kendall. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think it's necessary for me to give a little history of the chronology of this project, because I've heard a lot of comments which seem to imply that we have not had the community input that was required, and I can assure you we've had an enormous amount of community input. On the amendment, let me speak to that first. This was not a requirement by the Planning Commission. This is something that the developer agreed to do in hopes to get the project moving. There has been a traffic study done, and it was approved by Planning Commission as a part of the presentation to the Planning Commission at the time this project was presented. There have been several meetings on this. Ms. Virtue, I'm not asking for councilman courtesy. I've looked at this project and I take it very seriously. I agree with you that the streets there are narrow. As a part of this project, the developer has agreed to widen streets, to provide sidewalks where there are no sidewalks, to improve the drainage, which Water and Sewage and Public Works has looked at. All of those factors to make it a more walkable community. Right now, it's not a walkable community. First, there's been a lot of give and take in this. The first meeting I went to was at Cone Adult Center. Most of the people at that meeting, the majority of them, were from Kathleen's district. They were from the Sylvan Park area who were speaking against this project. There were some people there who spoke for the project who live in the neighborhood that we're talking about. There was another meeting at Mr. Bob Lewin's house that I attended that Ms. Murphy organized. And at that meeting, I asked, we had the engineer there from the developer. I asked over and over again, what do you want to happen here to negotiate something with this project? The initial thing was that they wanted the proposal to have a 7-story complex on the back of the project so it would come above the hill. They reduced that to 4 stories. At first, they had proposed 146 units. It went down to 123. There are a lot of concessions that have been done here. I asked the group at that meeting, I said, please let me know what I can talk to the developers about in terms of helping negotiate this. The answer was, the only thing we want is for them to leave it R6 and build 42 houses. Some people said, I don't care if he builds $1 million houses up there, he can make the same amount of money. All of this kind of conversation. Of course, I ignored that. But we've had several meetings. I've met with people individually. Just the other day, I met with Mr. Bob Lewin, and we discussed it. And he acknowledged to me that initially, the idea was to kill the project from this increase. Now, it's an evolving area. It's right off of Charlotte Pike. Yes, there will be some increase in traffic, just as all the apartments that are being built up and down Charlotte Pike are increasing the traffic. We can't assure that the city is going to put a traffic light at 35th. That was one of the concerns, too, that it not be 33rd, but it be 35th. So they agreed to do that. They agreed to widen the street, the development. These are infrastructures that the developer's going to do that he doesn't have to do. If he built just 42 houses up there, single-family houses, he wouldn't have to do any of that. This amendment that we're talking about is being introduced, not required, but to ensure, to help the neighbors ensure that if there are additional things that need to be done, which will be way down the road, Mr. Withers can't do it right now. I mean, this plot probably, it might be a year and a half before construction actually is approved by codes to go forward. So are we talking about deferring this project for a year? I've been asked to defer it 6 months so they can start over. I think that's ridiculous. There were a lot of opportunities here to negotiate, to get this project online. I encourage you to vote for it and let's get on with it. It's not a killer project. It's in an area that's been approved by the city, by the Planning Commission, the planning staff. And, you know, to say that we haven't had input, there have been several meetings. I've talked to people individually. I know there were people, Planning Commission, when the Planning Commission approved this, there were about equal number of people there for and against this project. There's some people in the area, and I know it's easy to be against something. All you got to do is make a bunch of phone calls and say, hey, email somebody and tell me you're against it. That's easy to do. But this project, in my mind, will improve that area. It will improve the infrastructure of that area. The other thing that's key to me, when this project first started, there was no talk about affordable housing. Well, in my district, in the 21st district, affordable housing is almost non-existent. And everybody who wants to build something on a lot wants to build market price housing. This project, we've agreed, will have 12 units built that have to be built according to the SB that are affordable housing. So I encourage you to vote for this. Deferring it will do nothing more than start this process over again, and we'll be back here in 6 months or whenever. If you defer it 2 or 3 weeks, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. So we'd be back here in 6 months with this same argument. The developer, who's probably spent lots and lots of money on engineering, architecture, legal fees, and whatever, and I don't know about his finance, and I haven't talked to him about that, but I'm sure that banks are not going to sit around whoever's going to finance this project, and wait 6 months to get it approved. It'd be different if this was, you're talking about Charlotte Pike. You're talking about coming out, and I can't assure that there's going to be a traffic light put at the corner of, and in my discussion with some of the neighbors, they don't want a traffic light there because they said, well, even back things up further. Because you got a traffic light right there at 31st, you got one at 37th. You're talking about putting another traffic light in between that at 35th. So anyway, I encourage you to vote for this. It's not there's been a lot of community input. The only community input I see happening in the future, if we defer it, is the same input that you get. I know you're getting a lot of phone calls, and probably from one individual. But there are people in that community that I've talked to who live in that same community who support this project, who support the infrastructure that's going to be done, the sidewalks, the curbs, the walkability, the widening of the streets. These are things that would not be done if you left it like it is as an R6. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion on the floor is on the amendment to add traffic study. All in favor on the amendment? Aye. Opposed? Amendment passes. Move as amended. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. Motion passes. Next one, BL 2017-854. Changes 1.04 acres from RS5 to MUNA, zoning for properties located at 1233, 1310, and 1314 Lychee Avenue, sponsored by Councilmember Davis. I have a letter to approve. Is there a motion? Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. I think that concludes Planning Zoning Committee. Thank you.